Alright, welcome to Stampscaping 101. We're going to do a quick version of this full page scene that I just did last night. 8.5 by 11. Waterfall scene featuring a lot of background mountains. The Gushing Falls large, and I have another fall down here, like there's a lake here and it's cascading down, kind of forming this lake in between. Alright, but what we're going to do on this easy scene is, instead of using glossy cardstock, which some of you have, some of you don't, okay, we're going to use this matte cardstock. Okay, now this is a cardstock and it is a coated cardstock, so it's going to be a little bit more, I would say, accommodating to the buildup of dye-based inks. Not as much as glossy cardstock, but more than an uncoated paper. You can try it on uncoated paper, but it's going to be more absorbent and it'll have a different look in the end results. Go ahead and give it a try. A lot of people use different types of papers in this process here. People use linens and I don't know, all kinds of different textured papers and whatnot. So just know that it's going to take a little bit of a different process in terms of especially the addition of inks. Alright, so we're going to work this one around the Gushing Falls large. You can use Cascading Falls, Babbling Brook, Brook Falls, whatever. This one's one of our G-size stamps, though, and it will take up most of the space going from left to right when we're talking about a quarter-page card, okay? 4.25 by 5.5. We're going to be stamping out our imagery with dye-based inks, okay? But wait for me to do the foreground. I think I'm going to use my VersaFine pad, if you have one. Some of you like the Claire one, but something that's going to have a little bit more depth and value to it than a dye-based ink. If all you have is the black dye-based ink, go ahead and use that one though, okay? So if we're using different types of surfaces, brands of papers, different brands of inks, it's going to take on a little bit of a different look, so don't try to match it up exactly. What you're doing is you're trying to get the gist of the techniques down in terms of this entire process right here. And I'll show you how to utilize some different tools, well, media, in order to achieve kind of a more advanced, kind of sophisticated look in just a very easy way, okay? And that's using the bleed-proof white if you happen to have it, and some white pigment ink. A lot of you have white pigment ink though, okay? And that's going to give us kind of a more advanced type of look. Okay, now at the base of all of my waterfalls, when I stamp them out, what I like to do is I like to take off some of the ink, okay? Don't be too, delicate with that. Take a good amount off. I'm dabbing it down there pretty good. I'm using a dry paper towel, though. Don't use a wet one, because that'll take off a little bit too much. And what I want is I want there to be kind of this misty type of frothy feel to it, with the water churning, and I just feel that it kind of gives it that cloudy atmosphere to that mist rising, and that gives us a lot of depth within the scene. Alright, now we're going to stamp this fairly high in the composition. We're not going to leave room and space for something like a moon. If you stamp this clear up top and it's going off the top of the paper, that's fine too, okay? If it's stamped below a 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, it doesn't matter. Okay. And we're going to keep this one in kind of a night scene. That's really easy for beginning scenes. We're not worried about too much about different types of colors and whatnot. We're kind of focusing on value and kind of mood and essence of the scene, the spirit of the waterfall, okay? Alright, so we stamp that out, and one of the things for me immediately, because I'm used to working on a lot of things like, I don't know, like photo papers and glossy cardstocks, is that this stamps out much lighter to begin with, okay? Now that could be a weak point in that it's not really stamping out the full value spectrum of the dye-based ink going to black. This is more like a 60% gray, in fact, so quite light. But we're going to take advantage of that aspect of dye-based inks like that on absorbing into kind of a matte paper when we stamp out our VersaFine in black, and that'll give us a lot of depth and then we're going to take advantage of the that kind of lighter value aspect of it. Okay, now if you have some water pattern stamp textures, you can use that down here. Maybe I will use mine. I want this scene to go pretty fast, but this won't take long at all. Okay, so we have 3 different values of blue right here, okay? Now, a lot of people take this stamp, they just stamp everything out in black, okay? And you can do something like that, but I'm going to show you how you can depict light with this stamp more than just stamping it out in a uniform, either black or grayscale. That looks good too, though. Okay, so let's go with 3 values of blue here, okay? You can use things like tumbled glass and, you know, replacement of the lighter blue. Go with broken china. You know, I'm talking about if you have distressing, so for Memento. If it's Marvy inks, you know, it's light blue, and, you know, salvia blue, something like that, okay? Dye-based inks. All right, let me show you how to utilize the water pattern stamp, okay? So I'm going to be stamping this out. It's super light on here, okay? Don't worry about it being too uniform and, you know, I think it's kind of blotchy or whatever. Okay, I don't know if you can see that at all. It is really light, okay? But that is the summer sky. Summer sky, even on glossy paper, it's barely visible, okay? Let's go to the Memento Bahama blue. Go to a medium blue now, okay? Now, instead of stamping that color everywhere in here, we might stamp a little bit of it, but not maybe not with the full impression, but check this out. This area in the middle here, we're kind of leave as is, okay? So I'll go like this. Imagine that you put like a silver dollar right in the middle here. I don't know, if you're in a different country, you know, think about like something about that big or something. Okay? I might get a little bit of this in here. Okay, but see this right here? See this hole right here? I've left that kind of open, all right? And now, let's go to our darker blue. Now this darker blue will kind of keep it a little bit even more perimeter oriented, okay? Now sometimes with this stamp I kind of have it on its edge like that, so I'm just getting that little tiny bit there, okay? But I use a lot of it on the perimeter here, and what is that doing? We're giving ourselves a head start with our lighting, our scenic lighting, okay? All right, see that right there? It's not perfectly stamped or anything. It's not even smooth looking. In matter of fact, it's quite the contrary. It looks kind of rough and boxy and, you know, not great at all, okay? All right, now we're going to have some more foreground imagery in here and whatnot, but let's go back to our paper towel. If you have sponge applicators or brushes, makeup brushes that you like to apply your inks with, go ahead and utilize those if you want to. I'm going to use a paper towel like this. I just wad it up, like so, okay? I try not to have any creases in it like this that I'm utilizing, okay? So see, I kind of have a nice smooth surface like this, okay? And I take my lightest color, and I'll get a good amount of ink on it. One of the things that really makes this process go a lot faster, though, sometimes is if you just use some re-inker fluid, pour it out on a little lid here and just sop it up, and you're ready to go, okay? But if you don't have that, and all you have is pads, just utilize it like this. Okay, we're going to ink this up. Let's avoid kind of the middle somewhat with this ink, but for the most part, color everything else. Don't color into the water too much, though, okay? The falling water. And then leave some area light down here, okay? So you're going to apply this in those areas where you applied your darker colors. Bring a little bit of this in here because this is the lightest color, okay? Now what I like to do is I like to create a little bit of a separation between kind of reflected light down here and the light source up here. Is water a light source? No. It tends to be very, somewhat more reflective than rock or something like that. So in this case, we'll say that maybe some moonlight is hitting this waterfall or something like that. Could be just, deep twilight still, and there's still a little sunlight or something like that. I don't know. But see this right here? Where I'm kind of leaving a little bit of that in there, but I keep coming in like this. And then when I'm doing this side, I come in like this, okay? So flip your card in the direction that's going to be the most conducive and comfortable. Okay, now, one of the things I'm finding, too, and you might find on yours, as I'm going in here, that rock right here, the waterfall stamp, the rocks right there, my pad was quite inked up, but it did, stamp out fairly light down there. It doesn't mean it's dry, so I find that I am smearing a little bit this rock, okay? That's not worrying me. I don't want it to just totally spread out like that. But it is smearing it a little bit, but that's okay, okay? Just go ahead and kind of keep inking it up, okay? Now one of the things, after I start using this, it's getting drier on my applicator, be it your sponge, your brush, or whatever, okay? And when it gets a little bit drier, what I want you to do is turn your waterfall upside down like this, and then come from the upside and kind of do a little bit of color in there. Don't try to color in the whole waterfall. Don't fill in that whole space. Just get a little bit of ink on it and do it like a streak like this, okay? See how dry this is? I'm really dry brushing it in there. I hope it doesn't bother you and give you that kind of chalk, fingernails on a chalkboard type of feel, but it's a little bit of that. Okay, but see, we get a little bit of tone in here just so it's not just stark white. But we didn't color it all out, okay? I have like a streak of it here and a streak of it over here, all right? Okay, so just keep adding this in. Add it in, even if you've colored an area, I want you to add more. You might be able to get darker using your existing color, and if you can, use more of that before going to a darker color, okay? The first color is not just to color, it's to kind of saturate the pulp of the paper a little bit. And when the pulp of the paper gets a little bit more ink in it and water, okay, what it does is it starts to build up a little bit more of this, I wouldn't say super saturation, but saturation, so that when we move into our next color, okay, our next value of that color, it makes it easier. Use your same kind of part of your paper towel or whatever you're using. No need to change. It makes it easier to spread these darker colors, okay? Now, if it feels just so dry to you still, what you can do is you can go back to your lighter color and try to add more. Now, if it's an uncoated paper, it's really going to be sopping up your ink really fast, okay? But hopefully you can see. Here, I'll do 1/2 of my paper. Okay, now, on this one right here, avoid the temptation to just color everywhere that you did with your previous color. For the most part, I mean, this isn't so dark of a blue right here that I can't, but this is what it looks like from side to side, okay? So I came in here, I went over my rocks, kind of wiped in this way. But see this right here? One of the things about water down here that's going to look really good is if you leave it a little bit more streaky and irregular, okay? So watch this right here. I'll just kind of streak across like this. And see how that pulls that ink across there like that? And then I'll kind of come down here, okay? I like to have my four corners quite a bit darker because I think it frames the scene off very nicely, okay? So see that water right here? See those streaks going across like that? But see, I streaked it from this way, like that, and then I came to it from this way, like this. All right? It has kind of a more natural look as it goes into that lighter area. The streak is a little bit thinner when it gets into that light like that, okay? All right, so we're coming along. You can leave some of your rock here a little bit lighter, okay? Now, really take a lot of ink off. Sometimes it's hard to tell how much you have on here. But when you get really dry with this, okay, you can kind of add a little bit more color to your waterfall. I'm barely touching the page, and I'm just going over it like this, okay? So I'm barely touching it. If it isn't dark enough when I get my streak like this, avoid the temptation. You know, don't go like this and say, I can't see it, press, you know, and then you get that, okay? Just stay with it. It's like putting like makeup on someone's face, okay? You just want to build it up. Think of it almost like you're applying like a dry medium to the surface. Don't think of it like you're using a marker and getting a full saturation of a color. Okay, but this is just the second color, and look at that dimension that we're starting to get. My paper towel's starting to fray, so what I do is I just kind of fold it over like this. And that's ready to go, okay? All right, I think that's it with the Bahama blue. Let's try the Danube blue. Okay. Ink it up like so. It's kind of a little bit easier if you have the previous ink on there, but I'm starting off with a brand, new paper towel area here. It's the same paper towel, but just I used a little bit of a different area on it. Okay, but see that right there? See that four corners? Concentrate on the four corners when you get, into your darkest of colors, or darkest of value of whatever hue you happen to be working in. See, I can get a little bit darker by dabbing it like this too. But when I'm dabbing it like this, I'm kind of pulling it a little bit like this too, rather than just going like this. Okay? It's more of like this. See, it has that kind of feathered edge to it. Okay? Alright, see that right there? The darker you take an area, the lighter your lighter areas are going to seem by contrast. And by the way, if you're doing this, you could have done it on glossy cardstock if you wanted to. I built it up a little bit too much there. I should have kind of tapered that. Let me try to taper that in there a little bit. It doesn't matter because we're going to be coming into this with white pigment ink too. Okay, look at that beautiful kind of source of light. It looks like that water is kind of moving now a little bit more. It doesn't look so static. We can streak across like this if you want to. How about a little bit more in the bottom left and right corner? Okay. All right, I think that looks good. All right, now one of the things you can do if you want to is you can go into it with black. I like putting a little bit of black. Well, let's just do this. Let's spend 30 seconds doing this, okay? Ink it up with black, and I'm hitting it in the corners like this. I guess it kind of closes off the corner where I didn't stamp the, where the waterfall didn't stamp out. There was a little bit of space on the sides there, so that closes that out a little bit more. And I can add a little bit here into the left and right corner. It's not so much black as it is kind of a little bit of a dim gray. And you can add a little bit into this area down here where the waterfall meets the water to give it a little bit of a shadow. What I'm doing is I'm basically just, what are we doing here? We're just kind of framing off the edge a little bit. Okay. All right. It's interesting for me using this matte paper. It has a different look to it. It's definitely a lot softer in feel and in visual texture. Okay, now here's what you're going to do. If you have a white pigment ink pad, where'd mine go? You have a white pigment ink pad, and how many of you have just cotton balls at home? We're using just our standard household items. If you have here's the thing about cotton balls. If you have real cotton, 100%, it works better than the acrylic ones. I find the acrylic ones kind of resist ink buildup. Okay. All right. Now, my pad right here is super dry at this time. I use it a ton. Okay. So I'm just really dabbing into it. A lot of your pads at home, though, are going to be super saturated and inky. Okay. And if that's the case, just barely dab it in there. Just kind of touch it. Okay. And then kind of blot it off a little bit. If you have a kind of a dark piece of paper, you can kind of test it on it. What we don't want is just go like this and get blobs of paint everywhere. You want this to be kind of a dry brush application. Look at my fingers. The one thing about paper towel is that your fingers get a little bit inkier, you know. But hey, they're cheap and available, just the same as cotton balls, right? Okay, so we went from dark to light, you know, when we're applying, you know, our darker colors, okay? But now we're working with light. So with light, we're going to be working from light to dark. So you're going from in to out with this. With colors, you're going from out to in, you know, out to in streaks, okay? So I'm going to start off around my lighter areas. If your waterfall is really white and you can't see anything, this might not be visible. So you kind of work this like this, out into that lighter area, okay? Like that. Maybe I should stamp out my little canoer there, or fisherman, or whatever that's going to go down there first. It's easier to stamp that onto something that doesn't have pigment ink on it, okay? But see this right here? See that kind of frosty feel to it? See it right there? Let's use a little bit up here, too. I like a lot of it at the base of my waterfall. It might not show up too much if this area here didn't get too dark, because you're going white into white or white into very light, but it'll show up a little bit. Okay, it especially looks really good on this matte paper. I do like this matte paper with, you know, when I'm trying to depict something very soft, because the matte paper doesn't get as crisp as matte. That's why I always like using this on glossy cardstock, but this is already inherently a little bit kind of lighter and softer in appearance, you know, when you stamp out all your scenes on it and applying your inks to it, okay? But do you see that kind of frosty kind of feel? So this shows up where light meets dark. You don't see too much of it right here because I'm going light on light. But when I start to move it out there like that, we do see that kind of frosty mist. Okay, I'm going to stamp out. Now this is something that you could have done earlier too, but I'm going to put this little solo Canoeist down here. You can stamp any type of water image down here. It could be a bird or something like that. We want to get everything stamped that we're going to stamp, though, before we go over it with the pigment ink, okay? So I like a little bit of this pigment ink down here as well. Remember how I was saying it doesn't really matter, you know, what this water pattern looked like, if it looked a little bit clunky. And that's because if we use a little bit of this type of effect in here, we can use some Dr. Martin's Bleed Proof White to do some splatter painting. We can also use our white paint pen, or if you have a white gel pen, that would look really fantastic in here. Remember that area where I kind of came into a little bit too harsh with, I think it was the dark blue or black, and I said it doesn't matter? Well, you see, I can just come in here and put this cloud of kind of misty water right over the top of it. You can't even see it, so you don't worry about things, you know, kind of along the process, because a lot of things can get, I don't know, almost erased, you know, when you apply this additional media into it. That's why for me, I don't worry about all that stuff. Sometimes I don't even stamp out my impression all the way. It's like, oh my gosh, I didn't put enough pressure on that part of the stamp, and you can't even see it, you know. But I just know that by the time I color it and add all this stuff in there, you know, those initial impressions, it does matter, but it doesn't matter quite as much as you think it would. Okay, so that's that white pigment ink in here. Let's go with the Dr. Martin's Bleed Proof White. For the price of one ink pad or one rubber stamp, if you get a bottle of this, this bottle can last it can last 20 years. I don't know. I had one bottle last that long. Of course, I wasn't using it every day for 20 years, but you know, for the amount of times that I use it, I don't use a lot of it. I just kind of get a little bit of splatter from it. But this is just such an effective medium. Then you get this like old toothbrush like that. What is that? Another household item, okay? All right, so I have my toothbrush here, okay? And I'm going to try to splatter this kind of at the base of these balls. Sometimes it goes all over the place and I don't have a lot of control over it. So you just have to, I don't know, and it splatters, it seems like in a different direction every time I do this, no matter how much practice I do, or I don't know if it's practice, but how much I do it. This works great for a snow scene too. Alright, so, I don't know, can you see that? Look at that, isn't that really dynamic? That, that's a kindergarten type of technique there. You remember doing splatter painting and stuff like that, you know, in school? It was probably with tempera paints or something like that. But isn't that an effective look right there? Look how dynamic that looks. Okay, now let's take our foreground image. I'm going to use the pines and rocks down here. You can almost use just about anything. Okay, and I do need to be careful around that bleed-proof white spatter painting. Okay, so I'll probably stamp this like down here, not here. That does dry really fast though. But let's give this a little bit of an extra kick. I could stamp this out in dye-based inks, but I like it in the VersaFine. I like it in an oil-based pigment ink to give it much more impact and presence on the scene, especially matte paper. So this is one of the things that's great about matte is we can go for a really strong impact of dark on light, okay? All right. Now we can't stamp this when we first start off. I think if I stamp this on the mat, I have a feeling that if I added that ink over the top of it, I think it would really smear it badly. So that's why I kind of retain this ink in the process until the last step, okay? Make sure I'm getting plenty of pressure. There's a lot of surface area on that. Okay, look how bold that looks in the foreground, against that background, that lighter impression. That's black back there, but this is VersaFine pigment ink black. Okay, there's probably some different brands out there. I take it the VersaFine, I don't know, I think it's for detailed stamps. I think that's why they called it fine, but I'm not sure. Okay, I'm going to be careful not to stamp over my Canoeist there. That would be kind of bad, just to kind of cover them up completely. I don't want to have this tree going right through that, although he represents something much further off in the distance, but I still don't want to have a pine tree just, spearing right through visually the canoe. Okay, so I stamped it here. Notice I didn't, use the whole thing, and I'll just stamp it a little bit lower down here, okay? That'll give us a lot of depth. But I think this is a pretty sophisticated looking piece right here. And what is it? We did this in 1/2 hour. But look at this. Look at the amount of movement and texture and presence in here. Pigment ink, Dr. Martin's Bleed Proof White. If you don't have like some Dr. Martin's Bleed Proof White, but you happen to have like a white paint pen or a gel pen, you can take something like this. This is a white paint pen, but I used to use gel pens before this. I happen to think that this one works better. And this is a really cheap pen too. They sell them like an 8-pack on Amazon for, I don't know, I think it's $10. Okay. I'm into thrifty use of things, if you didn't notice. Okay. I can put little dots down here. I can highlight some of these rocks if I want to. Okay. But see, this is what this pen can do is like these little dots like this. It's not quite as opaque. I can shake this up a little bit more. It's not quite as opaque as Bleed Proof White. Bleed Proof White is really white looking, okay? That's why they call it Bleed Proof White. With something like this, it's a little bit more translucent, although shaking it up right there did, kind of I don't know, make it a little bit more opaque. I mixed up the paint on the inside here. Okay, put these little sparkles down here. I have a video on just these pens too, kind of on the usage of them and how to start them off. So it's right here. I'm putting these little speckled dots down here. They call that specular light in photography. It's kind of light that's brighter than white. You know, it's like reflected lighting as opposed to something that's supposed to be white. You know, it's like a sparkle. If you have a silver pen or something like that for this blue colored scheme, that would look fantastic. But anyways, there you have it. A quick scene, but a really sophisticated one in terms of texture, depth, value in terms of lights and darks in there, and the technique in here, you know, as far as streaking and everything like that. What did we use? We used 3 colors in black. One paper towel. Look at this. There's all this other paper towel. I could have used, I don't know, probably a quarter piece of paper towel. Look at this. This is like all we used right here. Here's a paper towel to give you an example of what was used right here. This little tiny bit. Of course, you have to have it, wadded up like this. But see, I can use this over and over and over again. This piece right here didn't even use one full piece of paper towel. I mean, I used a full piece, but, I probably could have used a half. But anyways, hope you had a chance to stamp along with me in this scene, and hope you had a good time. If you have any questions, drop me a note in the comment section, and let me know how it turned out, okay? So remember, just in all of the impression portions of it, you're just kind of setting the foundation. But all these different ink applications and things like that, kind of making things a little bit more irregular, with streaks across there as opposed to filling all the whole thing. It gives it a lot of lighting and depth within the scene. And that's kind of a follow-up on my video on how to create depth from lighting and just kind of oscillating the use of lights and darks. This water down here, there's lights and darks in it. In my area up here, the waterfall, there's lights and darks in that. And that adds up to a deeper looking visual space and rich scene. Okay? All right, thanks again for watching.